start off by saying that I think the easiest way to conceptualize the upheaval in the Middle East and North Africa is to understand that the region is in transition with multiple interlinking subplots and struggles. Fact of the matter is that political transitions historically last anywhere up to half a century. And no matter where you date the beginning of transition in the Middle East, i.e. whether it's 2003 or 2011, we're just at the beginning of it. Through all these transitions, which involve regional conflicts, ethnic and religious disputes, is of course regional rivalries, and none more than the Saudi-Iranian rivalry. I guess if you think of the Middle East tonight, what you think of is President Trump's decision to walk away from the 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran. I think what you're going to see is initially Iranian restraint. In fact, you've seen Iranian restraint for some time. One thing I do think you're going to see is an arms race, and maybe even a nuclear arms race. And if that program were to perceive to be military, or at least partly military in nature, then the Saudis would feel obliged to do the same. And I don't think that that's a public battle that the Saudis want to be fighting right now, where they have other issues in terms of reputation, be that the Yemen war, be that their history of funding of ultra-conservative strands of Islam, or be that their human rights record and issues of governance that are particularly important in terms of attracting foreign investment. Yes, it is about ballistic missiles. Yes, it is about Iran's role in the region. But what this really is about is an effort at regime change in Tehran. I think one of the most fundamental transitions that began were the 2011 popular revolts. Those revolts were countered by forces willing to roll back the clock at whatever price. Tunisia may be teetering on the brink, but it is the only one of the 4 countries where the revolt was not ultimately defeated. Egypt today is a brutal dictatorship. Yemen and Libya are torn apart by war. Other countries where the revolts failed have not necessarily fared that much better. Syria is war-ravaged. Bahrain is a powder keg waiting to explode. Elsewhere, like in Morocco, Algeria, and Sudan, protests that are either demand or sector-specific or regional are par for the course until today. With other words, despite talk of an Arab winter rather than an Arab spring, the revolts have not gone away. Discontent is simmering at the surface, just like it was prior to 2011. And to be sure, repression today in the Middle East and North Africa is the name of the game. 2011 occurred because autocracies, with very few exceptions, had failed to deliver public goods and services. They still have not produced, and failure has come at an often enormous human cost. The response to the 2011 Arab revolts was not one that was designed to tackle root causes and address grievances. It was one driven by regime survival and existential struggles with the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Iran as key drivers. The United States remains the hegemon in the region and is likely to remain that for years to come. But it no longer projects the reliability it used to. And the notion that Gulf states would have to become more assertive in shaping their security environment had no greater impact than on 2 men with diametrically opposed concepts: United Arab Emirates Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed and Sheikh Hamad, the then Emir of Qatar. It was Sheikh Mohammed who understood that the UAE, despite Its size, or maybe because of its size, would have to be militarily recognized to influence reshaping of the environment, a feat he has achieved, with US Defense Secretary James Mattis describing the Emirates as Little Sparta. Sheikh Mohammed exploited opportunity in the waning years of Saudi King Abdullah and in the initial rising days of the future King Mohammed bin Salman. I would argue that once Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman comes into his own as king, the relationship will likely change. Mohammed bin Salman will want to be his own man. The waning years of King Abdullah's rule in Saudi Arabia was crucial because the UAE Crown Prince exerted significant influence in the Saudi court. It was those circumstances that played out in Egypt in the walk-up to the 2013 military coup that overthrew the country's first and only democratically elected president. The 2014 banning of the Muslim Brotherhood, despite differences in Saudi and Emirati attitudes towards the group. And that same year, the withdrawal from Doha of the Saudi, Emirati, and Bahraini ambassadors for a period of 9 months that was the prelude to the Gulf crisis that erupted in June of last year. And there were almost immediate indications that the kingdom was looking at some form of accommodation with the Brotherhood, even if it were not going to return to the status quo prior to the 2014 ban. It took Mohammed, the Emirati prince, some months to recover ground, and he has certainly done so in building his relationship with Mohammed bin Salman. Mohammed bin Salman is someone who appears to draw sharp reactions. One either thinks he's God's gift to Saudi Arabia, or one thinks he's the evil incarnated. And the truth is probably in the middle. No doubt, a popular figure in a country where more than half the population is below 30. He instinctively understands what needs to change economically and socially to move the kingdom into the 21st century and secure not only regime survival, but also its absolute grip on power. The question is whether he knows how to do it. And that is what makes Mohammed bin Salman's popularity fragile. There has been no management of expectations of the process of change. Expectations are running high. Timeframes in people's minds are unrealistic, and delivery is going to be key. You know, you're talking about a country with a very conservative culture. No matter how Mohammed bin Salman wants to rewrite the history, has been there for a very long time. You do not change those attitudes overnight. And there's no question, people want change. But change is not always a straight line from A to B. Bin Salman's grab for power last November, or his grab for power in general, but certainly last November, that amounts to moves towards one-man rule, means that he may no longer be dependent on religious legitimization. Although I still doubt that he's going to make a clean break with the Saudi version of ultra-conservatism. That, in some ways, may be bin Salman's response to the intimate challenge of Iran. That challenge would exist even without Iran's regional moves. Over the last 24 months, Saudi funds, not necessarily government funds, and unclear to what degree there was tacit encouragement, but massive Saudi funds have flown into militant madrasas along the Pakistani, Iranian, Afghan border. Saudi Arabia and Iran have been involved in a covert war for 40 years. But one major driver why the Saudis put $100 billion roughly over 40 years into the propagation of a very conservative anti-Iranian worldview, and that is the single largest public relations campaign in history. You can't blame the Saudis It's easy to, or let me put it differently, it's easy to blame the Saudis for everything. They aren't to be blamed for everything. You've had governments that have played politics with religion. Let me end by coming back to the Saudi-Iranian rivalry and being somewhat provocative. As far as I'm concerned, Saudi Arabia lost its battle with Iran on day one. It never stood a chance in hell. Again, as far as I'm concerned, Saudi Arabia's future in the Middle East is that of a second fiddle. There are three nations that, whatever state of disrepair they are in today, are the natural regional powers. And that's leaving Israel out of the equation. And those three nations are Egypt, Turkey, and Iran. What all three of those nations have is huge populations by regional standards, 80 to 100 million. Huge domestic markets, highly educated populations, industrial bases, deep-seated identity that's rooted either in a history of empire or a perception of thousands of years of history. They have battle-hardened armies, and they have geography. Saudi Arabia has very little, if any, of that. It's got Mecca and some degree of financial muscle.